Brewster here in the episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of Tool, and if you go back far enough on this channel, you'll find a very early episode of Chordplay called The Drones of Adam Jones, and that's technically the first Tool episode, and this is a continuation. We're going to dive a little bit deeper. And I also put together a Brewster's Millions of Rants episode called It's Tool Time. That was in 2019 when Fear Inoculum came out, and I was all excited. Totally turned into a giant Tool nerd in that episode. But this episode's going to dive a lot deeper, and these guys are essential. You know, Tool formed in Los Angeles in 1990 and went on to become one of the most important, metal bands of all time. Tool is really hard to classify as far as putting a label on their music because they're really hard to kind of pin down because they seem to be everywhere at once. And I put some thought into this. But imagine, if you're not familiar with Tool's music, imagine Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and Rush jamming with Helmet and the Melvins. And that kind of puts you like in the basic, neighborhood, I guess, as far as Tool's music. But that's not really, a complete label or a, comparison. But I like to kind of think of them as a post-metal progressive rock band. Or I guess you could also flip that and think of post-rock progressive metal. But they're all over the place. I definitely hear that heavy prog influence. There's definitely a metal influence, this ambient kind of spacious sound. And I don't know, there's just something really interesting about their music. I really respect these guys a lot. So a big part of my respect for this band centers around their guitarist, Adam Jones, and I really admire his playing style and approach to the guitar because he doesn't really approach the guitar in a regular, normal way. He approaches it more like this creative sound sculptor, with ambient drones and volume swells and scrapes and neat noises and all this stuff. Like a minimalist, shoegaze kind of approach. And then he shifts gears and comes to life and starts playing all these aggressive, power chord and single note riffs and guitar solos. But then also his background in Hollywood and film and art is very impressive. He worked on Jurassic Park and Terminator 2 and Nightmare on Elm Street and a bunch of stuff. So here's an image with some of Adam's Hollywood background, and this is so impressive. This lesson's also going to feature the MXR Dynacomp, and this is kind of a secret weapon in getting Adam Jones', guitar tone. And he does use a Dynacomp. You can find it on his pedal board. I think he uses it more for the talk box and some of the lower tuned songs like Prison Sex, which has a low B. And if you listen to that song, Prison Sex, you can actually hear that Dynacomp squish, in its tone. And it's kind of essential for getting that Adam Jones kind of character in your sound. Just a heads up. The opening, that's the song Undertow from the album by the same name, and it's something like this. And I actually picked this song because it demonstrates each of Adam's, kind of specialties with the guitar. And it starts with this really obnoxious, open string riff here. And you're basically just grabbing that open G, hammering on that A note, sliding to C, and then pedaling and kind of playing that open D string right there. Mimic that single note riff with power chords, these one-fingered, drop D power chords here. And it changes to a single note riff right here. You hear him kind of roll the volume down, and it gets a little quieter. the single notes turn into little partial power chords right there. Like a partial E flat to D5 right there. And the last time it's, you're actually playing more like 3-note power chords right there. And then it changes to this. Right there, we're basically playing a partial implied D major 7 right there. And you're going to move that up to the 5th fret, and you're basically playing an implied D7 sus, D7 sus 2 right there. And then you move that up a whole step, and now you're playing D major. But it's really crafty the way he's moving through that. And he's creating this really cool chord progression, but he's just moving, one finger. Really cool. And then after that, because he got a little quieter at the end, let that ring and bring in your volume like that. You're going to do kind of like a swell upward. And then you hear this riff. Interesting. It's really simple, but kind of like the epitome of an Adam Jones riff right there. Really dark kind of sound, that twisted bend and stuff in there. Really cool. Next up is The Patient from Lateralis, and it's something like this. It has this really mysterious and quiet, kind of ominous, sound, and you're hearing that. So it's all implied chords, but that opening chord, you could think of that a couple different ways, but we're in drop D, and I'm thinking of that as a D sus 2 over F, because there's your F, there's your D, and there's E, which is the sus 2. So you've got that, and then open up that, change that F to the low D open right there. Right there's like a partial, C major, and then A5 right there. So right there, cycling through that progression, and he's palm muting and everything, so it has that really quiet kind of sound, like that. The other thing you'll notice is it's picked exactly the same, for the most part, on every single note. So I'm just using downstrokes pretty much the entire time. So it has that uniformed, volume and sound. Because it sounds kind of dead, because everything's muted. And then it changes to this. And then dancing and grabbing, the C and D right there too, like that. I just let that ring the last time. Really cool, guitar part, and it has this building kind of quality to it, where you feel like you're going somewhere, as it starts to unfold. Really cool. And for another version of this type of playing from Adam, check out the song Third Eye, and you'll see an extension of what we saw in The Patient. Something like this. once again, but right there, we're basically grabbing D, F, and then that single G over there. So it's kind of an implied, D11 or D add 11. And then right there, just basically play the low D open, that D note there on the 5th fret on the A string, and then grab that E, and that's kind of an implied, like a D sus2. Because you're doing like that. And once again, that slight palm mute to kind of keep everything kind of dark and quiet. And it goes through that a lot. There's a bunch of repeats on that. And then it changes to this. I'm kind of viewing that like a D7 implied, and then right there that's kind of like a D sus2 implied. And you hear Adam, he kind of removes the mute and starts picking a little bit more aggressively, and it changes the character of that riff like this. Too, where he'll change, like the texture or the color of a riff just by changing his muting like that. Really cool stuff. The next example is from the song Ticks and Leeches, so we're back on the Lateralis album, and this is a great example of Adam playing something very quiet and minimalist, and then he basically variates the riff and just explodes, with this louder variation. So the quiet part's like this. So you want to, turn your volume down really low and strum kind of quietly. And right there, that's like an E sus2 to E5 because we're in drop to E. And he starts kind of strumming around on that E5 there. And then you got a G5 right there. And then you're going to do like the low strings of a D5 and then a little bit more, and then strum like a huge D5 right here. And then do it again. Forever. That goes on for like 3 minutes or something. I think this is like an 8-minute song, and like almost half the song is that. And then after that, when it kicks in, you've got this. It's just different chords. It's the same chords, just in a different place, I guess. But that's E sus2 to E5 again, instead of doing it that way. So you really just kind of moved it up an octave. And then a huge G5 to a huge D5 right there. And Adam loves that giant D5 right there. That part. The next example comes from the song Invincible from the Fear Inoculum album, and it's really interesting. Something like this. starts with this implied kind of drone D minor right there. So you're really just grabbing a bunch of Ds and that single F right there. So the low D open, the fretted D, there's also a unison with the open D string right there. So that's really interesting. He's also palm muting like we had in The Patient and some of the other examples so far. Change to this, so this is really unusual. So this is going to function as an implied F sharp 7 flat 9, which is weirdo. Like that. Do that 4 times in a row. And then you hear him shift all the way up here, and this is going to be a C sharp 7 flat 9. Back down to that F sharp 7 flat 9 twice. And then slide back up to that C sharp 7 flat 9. And then right there it's going to go to this. That's kind of like an implied E flat 6. And then you've got this, which is really cool. So that's like a B diminished flat 6 implied. So the 5th fret and the 8th fret there on the low E and A string, and then the open D and open G. So an implied B diminished flat 6, and then go back down to that E flat 6 right there. And the last time right there you're going to end with this, and that's an implied F6, which is really cool. Last example is one of my favorite Tool songs. This is Right in 2 from the album 10,000 Days, and it's something like this. With this. So you're basically grabbing that low D open, which is the low E tuned to D, that low D, and then you're basically spelling out a D5 right there. And then you're going to slide that A up to a C, so kind of an implied D minor 7, kind of. And then right there you're going to grab basically this, it's, we're in drop D, so that's going to be a B flat sus2. Alright, and your sus2's right there, so you're grabbing this. Basically a minor 3rd, and you're playing a G sus2 right there. And then you're going to move all the way up here, and it's kind of an implied C sus2 because you're grabbing the C note right there on the 10th fret on the low E string because we're in drop D. So that's C. And you're grabbing that high D right there. Right? So it's kind of an implied, C sus2, but that opening part there. Almost the same thing, but you hear that D move up to E flat, and then I hear the low, D ring, and then I hear that actually go back to that D note. You kind of hear that in there. And when you do that slide back to that D note, I think that's actually when he hits the low D open right there and starts the whole riff over. That's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of Tool, and there's something really special about their music. It's interesting, inspiring, and I know it struck a chord with me a long time ago, like 20 or 25 years ago. And it started with the Sober video, seeing that pop up on MTV, and it was weird and strange, but then I wanted to see it again. And then I wanted to hear that song again. And then eventually I bought the Undertow album. And probably about 20 or 21 years ago, I just became obsessed. I bought every album. I have them all on CD and on vinyl. I have their box set, Salival. My sister and I saw them in St. Louis back in 2007. That was a great concert, one of the best concerts I've ever seen. So I'm definitely a fan, and it's just different. Like when I get tired of listening or playing the same things, when I move over to Tool, it's refreshing because it's so different. It's not the same old thing. It's not blues licks and you know what I mean? Like it's just a really different approach and different style and everything, and I love it. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Learn Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.